Sup? This is the Geeky American Otaku. Well, we're nearing the end of another year. I did want to do a Halloween video, but unfortunately that never came to fruition. And I will be starting working on a Christmas video soon, and I will hopefully try and get another game show review done. But for now, I'm going to be posting a new installment of the Top 10. Now, if you remember my last video, I covered 10 NES games I wanted to see added to the Nintendo Switch online service. So, I decided to continue talking about the subject as we move from the 8-bit era to the 16-bit era, as the subject of this edition of the Top 10 is the Top 10 Super NES games that need to be added to the Nintendo Switch online service. As before, I'll cover 10 games I would like to see added to the NSO service and how likely they'll end up on there. Again, many of these may be my personal preferences, but some of these are probably some of the more popular choices. Now, with that in mind, let's go! Number 10. The Simpsons, Bart's Nightmare. In the early 90s, The Simpsons were at the peak of their popularity. They were literally everywhere, whether it be on TV doing Butterfinger commercials, on t-shirts, both bootleg and legit, and all kinds of merchandise, including video games. And like most licensed games, some were better than others. One of the good ones that a lot of us old-timers remember, or at least not so crappy, was Bart's Nightmare. In this game, Bart actually does something you wouldn't expect him to do, his homework. But while he was studying, Bart fell asleep, and his homework gets blown out the window and then ends up on Evergreen Terrace, called Windy World, in the game. While in this hub world, he avoids enemies like living mailboxes and TVs, Principal Skinner, Jimbo and the Bullies, and a fairy Lisa who will turn Bart into a frog. Eventually, Bart finds one of the pages of his homework and must play one of 5 mini-games, including Bartzilla, Bartman, Swimming Through Bart's Bloodstream, an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, and Idaho Simpson and the Temple of Maggie. If Bart successfully completes the level, he'll retrieve one of the 8 pages of his homework, otherwise he'll have to try again. If Bart gets all 8 pages of his homework, or he runs out of Z's to remain asleep, the game is over. Chances of it coming to the Switch? 30%. Bart's Nightmare was released back in 1992, and received mostly positive reviews from critics. Entertainment Weekly said it was, quote, a surreal blast, although some criticism was leveled at its difficulty. Nonetheless, it was better than some of the other Simpsons games from back in the day. The game was actually published by Acclaim, and they went out of business in 2004, and I assume the current owner of the game is Disney, who acquired Fox in 2019. That means Nintendo would probably have to work out a deal with the Mouse House, which of course is never easy because Disney. Number 9. Batman Returns. Like The Simpsons, Batman is no stranger to video games, with his first appearance on PCs back in 1986. And also, like The Simpsons, some games have been better than others, with his most recent games, such as the Arkham and Telltale series, among the best games ever made. And one of the better Batman games from the old days was based on the 1992 hit movie, Batman Returns. Unlike some of the other Batman games, Batman Returns was a beat-em-up, where the Caped Crusader travels through Gotham City in 7 different levels, battling enemies such as the Red Triangle Circus, Catwoman, and ultimately the final boss, the Penguin. Batman will have several tools at his disposal, such as his Batarang, and in one stage, he drives the Batmobile through the streets of Gotham. Chances of it coming to the Switch? 35 to 45%. Batman Returns was released in 1993 on the Super NES by Konami, who had a deal with Warner Bros. At the time. The game featured gameplay and graphics similar to Capcom's Final Fight series, and received high marks from game critics, including a perfect score from GamePro, and Nintendo Power ranked it as the 8th best NES game of 1993. Even as late as 2018, it was still ranked among the top 100 Super NES games of all time by Complex Networks. Now, it's a safe bet to assume that this game is currently owned by Warner Bros. Interactive, so the game could either be released on the Super NES service on the NSO, or maybe they'll release it in a collection of classic Batman games that could be sold on the eShop. Number 8. Spider-Man and Venom, Maximum Carnage. Another media franchise that has seen its fair share of video games, this 1994 beat-em-up featured your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and the symbiote-infected Venom, traveling through New York City to stop the supervillain Carnage and his team, as well as the criminals that they inspire and leave behind in their wake. Throughout the game, other Marvel superheroes can be summoned by collecting items throughout the levels, including Captain America, Black Cat, Iron Fist, Deathlock, and even the morbidly meme-famous Morbius. Depending on which character summon them, the summoned heroes may help out in different ways, usually being more effective for whatever character they favor. Chances of it coming to the Switch? Unknown. Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage was based on a 1993 crossover story arc in the comics where Spidey, Venom, and other Marvel heroes team up to defeat Venom's homicidal offspring Carnage and his team of supervillains including Shriek, Carrion, Doppelganger, and Demogoblin as they rampage across New York. The game was released by Acclaim in 1994 under its LJN label. Although the game got mixed reviews at the time, retrospective reviews are much more positive, and the game has been praised for its soundtrack, faithfulness to the comics, and the ability to switch between Spider-Man and Venom. In fact, James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, thought the game was actually decent despite being from LJN, aka Laughin' Jokin' Numbnuts, whose games he usually hates. Again, with Acclaim going under in 2004, the ownership of the game is currently unknown. But with the most recent Spider-Man games being released by Sony for the PlayStation 4 and 5, it's possible that Sony may not let any Spidey games be released on any non-PlayStation system anytime soon. Number 7. King of the Monsters 1 and 2. Another arcade port, King of the Monsters features fighters based as characters from kaiju and tokusatsu, which for those who are not Japanophiles like myself, are movies that feature giant monsters and costumed heroes with a heavy reliance on special effects, specifically the Godzilla and Super Sentai or Power Rangers franchise. Basically, you either play by yourself or with a friend and play as one of 3 giant monsters, or an Ultraman-like guy, and fight each other, or team up fighting other monsters while destroying Japanese cities like Tokyo and Osaka. The second game adds more monsters and takes place in other worldwide locales such as New York, Paris, and the Grand Canyon, and each stage now ends with a boss battle. Chances of it coming to the Switch? 30 to 35%. King of the Monsters was released in arcades back in February 1991 by SNK, the makers of the Fatal Fury and King of Fighters series, and it was then ported to their Neo Geo system later that year. The sequel was released the following year, and SNK had the games ported to the Super NES in 1992 and 1993, respectively. The game was featured on the classic Nickelodeon game show Nick Arcade in the video challenge segments, and was picked over other titles such as ActRaiser, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, and El Viento. Poor El Viento. Now, the game had mixed critical reviews, but sold well nonetheless. Both games can be purchased on the eShop, which would still be available on the Super NES service for those who don't want to pay the extra cash. Number 6, Tetris Attack, an internationalized version of the Japanese game Panel to Pawn. This game is basically Tetris in name only. The player must use an on-screen cursor to arrange colored blocks. Matching 3 or more of the blocks of the same color will destroy them. Any blocks above cleared lines will fall, which can be used to cause chain reactions if they touch other matching blocks. The player can also earn combos, clearing more than 3 blocks in a single move. As the stage progresses, the blocks will begin to rise steadily towards the top of the screen, with new blocks generating from the bottom. Once the blocks touch the top of the playing field, the game is over. The game features a story mode where Yoshi has to clear stages to defeat opponents, all the way up to Kamek and finally Bowser. There's also an endless mode, a timed mode, stage clear mode requiring players to erase the blocks before they pass a line, and a puzzle mode where they must clear all the blocks within a certain number of moves. Chances of it coming to the Switch? 50-50. The original game, Panel to Pawn, was released in Japan back in 1995, and it featured fairies in a fantasy-like setting. In fact, Panel to Pawn was successful enough that Nintendo created a new series called Puzzle League, which has yet to see light on our side of the Pacific, with a couple exceptions, such as the Pokemon Puzzle League game. Now, in 1996, the game was released overseas and called Tetris Attack, despite not being related to Tetris at all, and the characters and setting from Paneled Upon were replaced with characters from the recently released game Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Now, the name change actually led to the Tetris company's co-founder, Hank Rogers, stating in a 2009 interview that he regrets giving Nintendo permission to using the Tetris name. Rogers said he liked the game, but he believed it got lost in history due to it using the Tetris brand. Regardless, Tetris Attack was a hit, and some critics have said the international version is superior to the Japanese original. However, in May 2020, Paneled Upon was added to the Super NES on the Nintendo Switch Online service, marking the first time the game was available internationally, albeit in Japanese. However, Tetris Attack has not yet been added, mainly because the rights to Tetris reverted to the game's creator, Alexei Pajitnov, in 1996, and Nintendo would have to pay royalties to get the right to use the name again, including derivatives such as Tetris Attack. However, since Nintendo owns Puzzle League and the Yoshi characters, it's possible Nintendo could release the game as Yoshi's Puzzle League or something similar if they can't get the rights to the Tetris name again. Number 5. Sailor Moon, Another Story. An RPG based on the mega hit anime and manga created by Naoko Takeuchi, Sailor Moon, Another Story takes place between the 3rd and 4th seasons of the anime, and has a new enemy, a sorceress named Apsu, who arrives from the 30th century with a group of girls from Crystal Tokyo called the Opposito Senshi, or Guardians, Sailor Guardians, and they are sent to the past to alter it to Apsu's liking with their ultimate goal of obtaining the Silver Crystal. Apsu and her followers are able to revive some of the foes Sailor Moon and her allies had vanquished, and turn enemies that were healed back to the darkness. With the advice of the ghosts of the 4 Heavenly Kings from the first season, Jadeite, Nephrite, Zoisite, and Kunzite, Sailor Moon and the other Sailor Guardians set out to find Tuxedo Mask's Rose Crystal in order to change Sailor Moon's destiny and save Crystal Tokyo. As for gameplay, the players control either the 6 inner Guardians or the 4 outer Guardians, and the game follows traditional RPG gameplay. During battle, 2 or 3 compatible sailors can use link techniques, which are unique team-up attacks with various effects. All 10 of the Sailor Guardians are available from the beginning, but only 5 members of each Guardian team can join the player's party at one time. Chances of it coming to the Switch? 40 to 50%. Sailor Moon, Another Story was released in Japan back in 1995, and unfortunately the game has never been officially released outside Japan. But over the years, several ROMs have been available to download over the internet featuring fan translations. But in the years since then, Sailor Moon has only become more and more popular around the world, so it would make sense for Another Story to get an official release. In fact, with anime itself now more popular than ever worldwide, there's plenty of old anime games that never got released outside Japan that deserve to get exported. In fact, I'll be working on another top 10 list of Japanese games that need to be exported in a future video. Now, if Sailor Moon did get released, it could be on the Super NES on the NSO with an official English translation, but with an option to play it in Japanese for all the mega weebs out there. And since Sailor Moon was the first anime I ever saw, I hope someday we can get an official release. Number 4, The Legend of the Mystical Ninja. The first game in the long-running Ganbare Goemon series that was released outside Japan, The Legend of the Mystical Ninja features everyone's favorite blue pineapple-haired ninja Goemon and his friend Ebisumaru traveling throughout Edo period Japan to rescue Princess Yuki, who has been kidnapped, supposedly by the Otaku Army, a gang of mimes and clowns. Yeah, you heard me right. Anyway, Goemon and Ebisumaru have similar but distinct attacks and weapons. Their short-range weapons have 3 power levels, which gain better range when grabbing these white cat dolls left behind by defeated enemies. Now, their thrown weapons cost money to use, but they can also acquire bombs. Goemon and Ebisumaru acquire what are called judo attacks with 4 different levels. Most stages, called Warlock Zones, are split into 2 sections. One is the town section where the players gather information, buy items, learn special judo attacks, play mini-games, earn money, etc. And for some reason, Goemon and Ebisumaru can attack the townspeople. Anyway, one of the more notable minigames is based on the first level of Konami's 1985 arcade hit Gradius. The second section of each stage is a platforming section where the players fight through minor enemies until they reach the end and defeat the boss. And in a two-player mode, the characters can work together by having one ride the other, piggyback style. Chances of it coming to the Switch, 40 to 45%. The Legend of the Mystical Ninja was released by Konami in Japan back in 1991 as Ganbare Goemon Yukihime Kushutsu Imaki. I hope I got that right. Anyway, the game was ultimately exported overseas in 1992 with a new title. And for some reason, Goemon and Abyssumar were called Kid Yang and Dr. Yang respectively in all international versions. Now, as mentioned before, it was the first game in the Ganbare Goemon series to get a release overseas, as Konami had considered the series too specific to do well outside Japan, where over 20 games have been released, compared to just 5 titles that have seen international release with all but one stateside. The most successful of these were the 2 N64 titles, which I still own and consider to be some of my faves. In fact, there was also an anime that got released in America by ADV in 2003, with an English dub. So the series has its fans outside Japan, and it deserves more love. Anyway, The Legend of the Mystical Ninja has been released on the Virtual Console in the past, most recently on the Wii U. So Konami could probably allow it to get released on the Nintendo Switch online service, or better yet, release all the old Goemon games on the eShop after they get an official English translation, of course. Number 3. Tiny Toon Adventures, Buster Bust Loose. Sometimes there's a rare example of a licensed game being really good, and thankfully, this is one of them. This game is based on the popular Warner Brothers cartoon from the early 90s, and it features Buster Bunny in a side-scrolling adventure with 6 different stages, including Acme Luniversity, where Buster and Babs, no relation, and their pals learn how to be great cartoon stars. Other stages include a Western movie monopolized by, who else, Montana Max, a haunted mansion, a football game, flying in the sky, and a Star Wars parody level. Bosses include Dizzy Devil, the Mad Scientist, Gene Splicer, Pluck Vader, and yes, Mini Trump Montana Max. After completing a level, the player is given a chance to earn extra lives by playing a mini-game, the type of which is determined by spinning the Wheel of Comedy. Chances of it coming to the Switch? 30 to 40%. Tiny Toon Adventures was a popular cartoon back in the early 1990s, and it was one of my favorites growing up when I was a kid, and it had several games released on the NES, Game Boy, and Sega Genesis over the years. But the Super NES game is probably the best one. In fact, critical reception was mostly positive when the game was released back in 1993, with IGN ranking it number 99 in their top 100 Super NES games of all time. Complex Networks ranked it 92, and Nintendo Power ranked it among the 10 best of the year. The game is most likely owned by Warner Brothers Interactive today, and with the upcoming reboot of Tiny Toons in development, maybe they can consider licensing this one again for old-time fans and for a new generation to enjoy. Of course, Warner Brothers' recent struggles may hamper a release of this classic. Guys shouldn't have bought the Discovery Channel. Number 2. Earthworm Jim. One of the more bizarre games released in the 90s, you play as Jim, who is indeed an earthworm. But one day, a special robotic supersuit falls from the sky and allows him to operate more like a human, with his worm body acting as the head. Jim must now battle several alien antagonists who all want the suit back. The game is a typical 2D platformer with elements of a run-and-gun game, where you control Earthworm Jim and must maneuver him through the level while avoiding obstacles and enemies. Jim's gun can be used as a method of shooting enemies, or his worm body can be used as a whip for whipping them. The whip move also allows the player to grab hold of and swing from certain hooks in the game, in order to get across gaps. Anyway, some levels have additional requirements beyond merely getting to the end of the level. For example, in the level called For Pete's Sake, that's what it's called, Jim must make sure the computer-controlled Peter Puppy character gets through the level unharmed, and failure to do so results in Peter lashing out at Jim and making him lose health. Levels usually end with a boss battle, and some of the bosses in this game include, and I'm not making these names up, Psy-Crow, Evil the Cat, Bob the Killer Goldfish, Robo Chicken, Major Mucus, Professor Monkey for a head, and my favorite, the final boss, Queen Slug for a butt. After Jim defeats the last one, you rescue Princess What's-Her-Name, only for her to be crushed by a cow. But she survives, though. Chances of it coming to the Switch, 60 to 70%. Anyway, Earthworm Jim is certainly one of the most bizarre video games ever made. It was released on both the Super NES and Sega Genesis back in 1994 by toymaker Playmates, and it became a surprise hit. The series became known for its platforming and shooting gameplay, surreal humor, and edgy art style. In fact, it did well enough to get a sequel the following year, and even got an animated series on Kids WB. 2 more games were released before the series went dormant. Earthworm Jim 3 on the N64 and Earthworm Jim Menace to the Galaxy on Game Boy Color, neither of which were as successful as the first 2. The series has been owned by Interplay Entertainment since 2000, and the first game got an HD remake in 2009, and a planned 4th game in the main series is actually in development. Now, both games technically are available on the Nintendo Switch Online service, but only the second game is available on the Super NES, but not the first one. Supposedly, this is because the Genesis version is superior to the Super NES version. Conversely, the first game is found on the Sega Genesis on the NSO, but not the second one. This means if you want to play the first game, you have to pay for the expansion pack, which is at least an extra $30 a year. Most of us don't really want to do that, so Nintendo should really work out a deal with Interplay so that both games can be available for those of us in poverty. And to be fair, they can add Earthworm Jim 2 to the Sega Genesis service as well. And number 1, Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars. I'm sure you knew this would be my top choice. One of the first role-playing games played by many outside Japan, Super Mario RPG features everyone's favorite plumber in an isometric 3D adventure, unlike anything he'd experienced at that point. Now, in the beginning of the game, Bowser kidnaps Princess Peach yet again, and Mario has to rescue her. And although it looks like he succeeds, a gigantic sword slices through the sky and impales Bowser's Keep, sending Mario, the princess, and the Koopa King flying in different directions while in the process destroying the Star Road, which granted people's wishes. Mario tries to return to Bowser's Keep, but the castle has now been taken over by the evil Smithy Gang, who plans to build more weapons and take over the world.
Of course!
The keep now inaccessible, Mario has to travel through the Mushroom Kingdom while along the way meeting new friends like Mallow, who was raised as a tadpole by the wise Frogfucius. Eventually they run into a living doll named Geno, who is actually possessed by a celestial spirit from the Star Road, and he tasks Mario with finding the 7 star pieces so the Star Road can be repaired. Otherwise, people's wishes will never come true again. Later on, Mario and company run into Bowser, who reluctantly teams up with his longtime enemy. Finally, Mario finds Princess Peach, and she also agrees to join the journey. Super Mario RPG features many longtime JRPG elements, but with a Mario twist. In the overworld, Mario will travel throughout the stage, jumping up platforms, hitting blocks, and collecting coins. If Mario runs into an enemy, he and up to 2 allies will enter a turn-based battle where they can gain experience to increase their HP and FP, the latter as flower points, which allow for magic-based attacks. Players can avoid these battles if they choose, but of course they must always take part in a boss battle. Each of the characters have different weapons and abilities. For example, Mario can use Koopa shells and hammers as weapons, or jumping and fireball attacks. Bowser and Geno use primarily offensive-based attacks that deal heavy damage. The princess can use healing magic, or later attack with a frying pan, and Mallow can use thunder-based attacks. Chances of it coming to the Switch? 70 to 75%. Super Mario RPG was initially released in 1996 on the Super NES as a collaboration between Nintendo and Square, now Square Enix, the makers of the Final Fantasy series. This game pushed the Super NES to its limits, received rave reviews, and went on to be the 6th best-selling video game of 1996 in the United States, and it is still considered one of the 10 best Super NES games of all time, and it helped introduce Western gamers to the JRPG genre, which many of us had never heard of back then. Eventually, Nintendo would release other RPGs featuring Mario, most notably the Paper Mario series and the Mario and Luigi series. But this was the game that started it all. And while Super Mario RPG has been re-released on both the Wii and Wii U's Virtual Consoles, and on the Super NES Classic Edition, it has yet to come to the Nintendo Switch. The main reason might be the cross-ownership between Square Enix and Nintendo, and of course Nintendo has had a love-hate relationship with the former over the last 20 years. But since Nintendo owns the Mario franchise and the game has been re-released in the past, I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we can play Mario's first RPG adventure on the go. Besides, I think Bowser as a good guy is just too much fun. And that is my list of top 10 Super NES games that need to be brought to the Nintendo Switch Online service. If you can think of any other games you'd like to see Nintendo bring there to the Switch, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until then, I am the Geeky American Otaku. Remember, I am thou, thou art I.